Welcome back. I'm Patricia Johnson-Fung. Let me start with a simple question. When budget pressure hits, do you actually have choices or do you just make the cuts that are needed? This is the difference in what this next part of the series is really about. All right, so in the series, we've been working through IT budget management end to end. Part 1, we talked about the current state, the pressure shaping IT budget decisions and why they feel so hard right now. Part 2, we talked about what good looks like, the desired state of IT budget management. Part 3, it's about action. What can we actually do about it? Today, I'm kicking off 3.1, IT cost rationalization. Then coming next, we're talking about cost transparency, business alignment, risk-based decision discipline, and general leadership behaviors to make all of this stick. When people hear cost rationalization, they often just think it means cutting more. But real rationalization isn't just about cutting more, it's about choosing better. Across the board cuts, might feel fair, but they generally don't work because when everything gets cut equally, nothing actually really gets fixed. For leaders, rationalization is how you protect what matters most while deliberately, kind of trimming down, exiting what doesn't. It creates options before the pressure forces your hand, and that's what separates the control from the reaction. So the practical, first step is knowing your trends and your cost structure. 1 year of data doesn't tell you that much. Direction, volatility matter far more than just that single number. Let's look at some examples. The first one on the left, it compares run and grow costs. So when run costs, they keep rising year over year, that's just not sustainable, especially if demand and outcomes there aren't really changing. Now, let's look at, the one on the right that evaluates the spend, internal labor, contractors, infrastructure, software. You start to see what's really driving the growth in the budget. So for many organizations like software or SaaS, it quietly becomes fastest growing cost. You need to be paying attention to that. So again, if you don't understand what you're paying for, rationalization, it becomes guesswork instead of that leadership control that you can have. Now let's look at visibility of target versus actuals via a waterfall chart. This is where visibility really matters. Waterfall charts, they help leaders see what actually moved between the targets and actuals, those deltas, not just the number that you missed overall. In this example, you can see that the software and the contract workers, they spend grew way beyond what was planned. That's the moment where the conversation shifts. You have a discussion about the accountability for the changes. Nobody's surprised by it. So for leaders, again, waterfall views turn budgeting into learning loops. You take a look at it, you figure out what's changed. How do we have the right conversations? Maybe there's a good, valid reason for that shift and that change in those spends. Great. But if you can't justify it, we need to dig down and understand why and figure out how we gain the right control where necessary. So again, this helps us understand why spend changed, not just that it did. And it enables that better decisions going forward. Now let's discuss benchmarking as proactive diagnostic and alignment tool for budgeting. Benchmarking is another area that's often misunderstood. It's not just there to tell you what to cut. It tells leaders, where do I reflect? Where do I want to ask better questions? Metrics like spend as a percentage of revenue, run versus grow mix, labor efficiency, software spend, they can highlight patterns. But without the context, benchmarks can be dangerous. For example, high spend, it can signal digital strategy, but it could also signal inefficiency. Low spend can mean discipline, but it could also signal underinvestment. So you have to understand the context and having the right conversations within your organization. Again, used correctly, benchmarking, it helps align the CIOs with the CFOs, the CEOs around the discussion, not just the directives of the organization. A CIO can really, benefit, being armed with benchmarking data, particularly if one feels like cuts are deeper than sustainable, for the organization. Could be actually harmful if we're cutting too deep for things, for example, like security. So if one can show that they're performing at, say, best in class for costs compared to peers, for example, it can help shape the argument for how much IT must really need in order to contribute to the corporate functions of the organization. So again, benchmarking, it's a diagnostic tool, an aid, not necessarily just a target. Next up, let's talk about budget cuts and how fast can your IT costs actually move once a decision is made. So one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is assuming all costs move at the same speed. And by move, I mean, hey, you make a decision on your budget costs to cut something. You can't assume it's off the books. They don't come off the books at the same speed. In reality, IT costs have very different response times, which is again the amount of time it takes to actually realize those reductions. Some costs, perhaps like cloud consumption, discretionary SaaS, temp labor, it might be able to move off in a few months. Others, like if you have actual consulting contracts, or maybe you already have hiring pipelines, they might take longer. And many costs, including just core labor or platforms or security baselines, they might be fixed for a short term. Again, this will vary by company, but the principle holds. You have that cost flexibility. It's really about the timing. It's not really the intent for the cost. So rationalization, it works when leaders understand what levers actually exist, which ones create risk if they're pulled too fast, which ones have less risk, and you might be able to make reductions sooner if that's what's really needed in the organization. Again, so I'm just sharing this as a tool to help you think about what you might need to truly understand with regards to budgeting and decision making if you're having to make cuts. So to wrap up, I'll leave you with this. IT cost rationalization is about creating choices before those pressure for budgets, really kind of forces the cuts. It requires, again, the understanding of trends, cost structure, visibility of what's changed, thoughtful benchmarking, and a realistic view of the cost flexibility that you have. The challenge for leaders isn't necessarily just trying to find all the savings. It's about making intentional trade-offs without creating that long-term damage for the organization. So next, we'll build on this with the cost transparency and business alignment. Again, because rationalization as a whole, it only really works when the business understands the trade-offs as well. So thanks for watching. I look forward to continuing the path forward on IT budget and cost transparency with you.